welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I am joined by an author of many books, but there is one book in particular that we are discussing today. It is an absolutely gorgeous combination of epic family history and a very interesting mystery, and I am so excited to be here and to have this conversation. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Hi, my name is Rick Skwiot, and the title of my book is The Bootlegger's Bride.
Before we get into The Bootlegger's Bride, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about your writing career in general and perhaps your other books.
Yes, I've been a writer my whole adult life, pretty much. Started off as a newspaper reporter and went into the dark world of PR for a while, then came out on the sunshine of fiction and memoir on the other side. This will be my eighth published work. There are two memoirs and six novels. My previous novel was one you might be interested in because it deals with education. It's called Fail, and it's about the failure of public education in inner city schools. It's a mystery. It's an urban mystery, and there's a lot of intrigue in that. Other books I've written, I have two or three books set in Mexico where I spent a lot of time back in the days when I was learning how to be a writer and how to not only how to write but how to be a writer. It's two different things, how to live that life and make yourself into what you want to be. So I've got three books there: Sleeping with Pancho Villa and Death in Mexico, and my memoir San Miguel de Allende, which is about the whole story of how I went to Mexico and reimagined myself or remade myself with the help from some good mentors.
Interesting. And you have a book about Key West as well. Are you a fan of Key West?
Oh yeah, I am. I lived there. I'm not in Key West today. I'm in Vero Beach, Florida, where I've been living, but I spent about 20 years in Key West. And so I'm a big fan of Key West and spent a lot of time in the water, on the tennis courts. And it's a good life. And I would like to get back there. But the whole COVID thing has thrown so many people into different situations. And a lot of your neighbors from New York have moved to Key West during the COVID, and thus prices have tripled for real estate there. So,
Wow. Wow, that is fascinating. I was there in 2021 and I was like, I could live here.
Yeah. Oh, another one from New York.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
But I'll
Welcome.
stay clear. So
Yeah.
cool. So could you tell us then a little bit about the inception point for The Bootlegger's Bride? Did you think about writing about a particular city, or was it a character, or perhaps a mood? Where did the project begin?
Well, it began in my family history, actually. I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. Parents were first generation Americans, my grandfather, grandmother, immigrants. And I spent a lot of time in the near north side of St. Louis on the old tenements and red brick streets and whatnot. And my parents had all these tales from the days of Prohibition and the Great Depression and World War II and whatnot. So I've taken some of that family lore and mixed it in with some of the ongoing gangland fights in those days, the people arguing over liquor and gambling and prostitution in St. Louis. And there was Egan Rats and Jelly Roll Hogan's gang. And one of the incidents in the book was it was taken from an incident my father witnessed when he was a young boy sitting on the stoop of his flat in North St. Louis and saw a car come around the corner. Someone stepped out with a gun and shot his neighbor to death. It was a gangland hit. And so that plays importantly in the book. But there is some of that gangland stuff, but a lot of it is, as you know, it has to do with family and honor and courage. And so it's a story not only about there's a murder mystery in it, but there's also a coming of age tale for a young orphan who is one of the main protagonists. I guess there are three or four protagonists in the book. the title character, the bootlegger's bride, who was a very dreamy, literate school teacher who lived in a fantasy world in some ways, which somehow led to her own self-destruction.
Mm.
And I'm not giving away too much here because a lot of it occurs in the first chapter.
Mhm.
That you find out a lot of this history. So a lot of the book is going back and forth in time and place from St. Louis to the near east side of St. Louis out in rural Illinois, and then also into the D-Day invasion of France and the death of his father there. And and plus a lot of the visits to during Prohibition to the speakeasies and hangouts in North St. Louis where people were making and selling illegal liquor.
Mm. Yeah, the setting in time and in place is all very vividly depicted. And I'm curious about, in terms of pre-writing and getting ready to build the story, what sort of research you did. Did you talk to family to recover some of these memories? Was there book research that you did?
Well, there's a lot of research that I did just looking into myself and trying to recall some of the stories from childhood from my mother, father, grandparents. And so that was a base on it. I did a lot of other research too, thanks to libraries and newspaper archives, which I'm sure you and your customers there at the library draw on very heavily. And a lot of institutions have a lot of good historical stuff on their websites, historical societies, as well as libraries and other institutions. So there's that. And also for most of well, I guess all of my fictional works are develop out of the place that, in my view, place determines character and character determines plot. And you look at Hamlet or you look at Huck Finn, you get some examples of that, or Toni Morrison's work as well, is that setting the place creates the characters, and then the plot derives after that. So I had these characters, I had the place, and I had some characters, and then things started growing from that.
Mm. Let's talk a little bit more about those characters. I'm really interested in how you approach character, both as like crafting individuals who inhabit the story, but also the dynamic between them, because that is so important in a story about intergenerational, relations in a family and sort of how that stretches over a very important part of American history. So could
And
you talk about crafting the family?
well, one thing I should have mentioned, I failed to mention, this is also a love story.
Mm.
There's a big love story there, at least one, maybe two or three in there, but the primary one with the bootlegger's bride and her bootlegger husband and how they met. It's a very romantic meeting, and it's like love at first sight. And they live this idyllic life until World War II interferes. And so it's about how that family is created and in a way destroyed and then recreated at the end. And also there's a undercurrent, anti-war undercurrent, in how that affects people who are subject to it, both in getting drafted and serving and perhaps dying, and to the families that are left behind. So there's that undercurrent there. And as a reader, you probably, well, you certainly understand the history of social realism, both in the United States and France. And I had one early reader who alerted me that this is social realism in many regards. It deals with working class people and some of the travail of the immigrant society and recent immigrants. So all of that figures into developing this family that is trying to maintain control over their lives. And it's very difficult. So with the growth of big government, people lost their local control through their local institutions, which was the church, the school, the library, the committee man, who you had access to all these institutions. And then with the coming of World War II in the 50s, the larger institutions started ruling our lives, the economy, mass media, big government, etc.
Mm.
So all that figures into this for those who are interested in seeing how this country was changed so much by those events of Prohibition, the Great Depression, World War II, and then the other wars that followed in Korea and Vietnam.
Mm. I am very interested in, yeah, that view of it as social realism, and it engages in social history over many important decades in American history. And that leads back to your statement about how place determines character, I think, because you are very much shaped by your place, not only in, the world or the country, but in
Mhm.
time as well. Mm.
Yeah. And place, I look at it in a very broad way. It's all those influences around you. It's not only the geography, it's also the culture and the religion and the family and all those other things that determine the setting of the life of the character. So there are a lot of influences to develop the character, which, of course, when you have a character, it has certain who has certain values from the culture and all the touchstones in one's life. That from that springs the action, and from the action, the plot, of course.
Mm. Let's talk a little bit more about AJ if we can. Um,
Sure.
I am very interested in his coming of age story and also how his character, I think, sort of exists at the intersection of the different genres that you are sort of writing in here, because he is obviously a part of this, the family history told across, these generations, these decades, and he's at the center of the murder mystery. And so could you, yeah, maybe talk about him and genre and how that all came together for you?
Well, he is, although for a good part of the book, he's a young man, 12-year-old, a teenager, but he's still pretty smart. And he's again his the place where he grew up on the outside of the town where his father and mother moved to get out of the city when his father made all this money in bootlegging and loan sharking. And so he had this very privileged and idyllic life on this lake out in rural Illinois. But it's also there's more history there because it's the area of the Cahokia Indian uh, tribe and their big metropolis that was there back in the day. And behind is all left behind are all these mounds where the Indians had burial mounds and whatnot. And so AJ is really imbued with that history, and it plays a big part in his life, along with his family history, the immigrant history, and other aspects from his mother, both my mother and father, who were both book people, both of them. And he ends up being a book person, but also a warrior, which is surprising after losing his father to war.
And I think he's a really interesting character too for, looking at that relationship within immigrant families of the generation who came over and the generation that was born there. And that does, I think, tie into sort of the other people in the area that shaped who he is, and that sort of existing in two groups, but not really also fully in either, because
Yeah,
you are not fully here, not fully Polish to your Polish forebears, but also you are not
yeah,
fully American or, to the people who are already there. Mm.
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And one of the things that one of I may digress for a second here because you'd asked before about research. And one of the things that I did a lot of research on was orphans
Mm.
because he's orphaned and I've not been orphaned until I was late in life. You know, my parents are gone now, but as a child, I had a very secure family. And this kid didn't lose his mother and father. So what does that do to you? So I started doing research on orphans. It's interesting how many significant orphans there were in the world, you know, from Madame Curie to Huck Finn in literature and others, Superman. And yeah, yeah, a lot of orphans. And the thing about that one of the things that a lot of these orphans have in common, they all have in common, is they're on their own. You know, they may have other mentors and people who are overseeing and taking care of them as AJ does, but that seemingly gives people a motivation because they're on their own and they have to rely on themselves. They become independent and self-reliant, and certainly AJ fits that mold.
Yeah, and it grows you up a little bit faster too. You sort of
Yeah, it does. Yeah,
become old before before your time. Yeah.
yeah.
I'd love to know about how you approach, juggling timelines going back between the 20s and the 50s. Were those two strands, as it were? Do you write them in dialogue, or do you write one and then respond to it with the other? What does your drafting process look like?
Well, the drafting process, it looks like a big mess, to be honest, as all fiction writing is. You don't know where it's going when you write it. You have an impetus to write a story, and then, but it's a big story. It's going to take place over hundreds of pages and tens of thousands of words. So it really is a messy thing. And in this case, there were a number of things that influenced me, but when I sat down to write it, I saw very quickly that I didn't want to write this chronologically.
Mm.
What I wanted to do is to have the structure be an emotional structure rather than A happens, then B happens. And what we're dealing with is I was trying to organize the book in a way that is more thematic, emotionally thematic. And so it went through a lot of drafts and a lot of moving around of chapters in it. And it takes, I think, and you can tell me as a reader, but I think it takes some concentration. Although the serious reader can get the stories. I think my hope is that by the emotional structure that keeps people turning pages,
Mhm.
which if I had in a chronological structure, we'd have this revelation in the first chapter. You wouldn't be the mystery there. You wouldn't know how things turn out or anything. So I wanted to write a book that I wanted to read, which is why I always write them.
I think that makes a ton of sense. And it does, for me, it really recreated that feeling of when you are grappling with, previous generations, your parents, or with your own childhood, you don't return to the past chronologically. You dip in and out of different places as they resonate for you or come up as you do new things throughout the world. And so it felt
Hmm.
like a very close emotional experience at times like that. So I appreciated that sort of the intimacy and the messiness that I think
Yeah,
is part of figuring out who you are and
right,
who your family is.
right. And part of the difficulty, but one of the great joys in writing a book, and this book, I got to go back and relive those times that I knew from my childhood in part at the end of that period, and I got to inhabit these characters. I got to inhabit uh, Hazel, the bootlegger's bride, and the young boy who's orphaned, and got to live with them and try to look at things through their eyes and feel their emotions. And so that's a difficult thing to do for a lot of writers, but I get carried away with the emotions when I'm writing, and being having the privilege of being able to live inside these characters and also to have the ability to create them out of nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when I sat down, and these people never existed. Now they do.
It's a kind of a miracle to sort of create people and then have empathy for them. That's a really kind of everyday miracle of writing, kind of lovely.
Yeah, it makes you feel like God.
Yeah.
Somewhat, in some ways, maybe.
Well, I'm so excited to recommend this book to our patrons. And, I know this is sometimes a difficult question to answer for writers because you can't talk about everything, but are you writing currently? What's on the horizon for you?
I've got two books that I've been working on that are on the horizon. They're both set in Florida, and they both are centered around tennis courts.
Hmm.
One in Miami, present day Miami, post COVID Miami, and it's a love story
Nice.
about a young love that was thwarted and then rekindled in later times. And it's an erotic love story set in Miami, and it's also about the changes in Miami that have happened. The other book is based on my time in Key West, and it's a dark, cozy mystery, if that's not a contradiction in terms. But there is, again, I'm giving away nothing here because it happens in the first chapter, but the tennis pro at the public courts there is murdered. He is strangled with a 17 gauge racket string in his pro shop. And he was publicly beloved but privately loathed by so many. So there are 20 or 30 possible people that wanted to kill him. So the story is about it's a series of interconnected short stories about the murder of the tennis pro. But I enjoyed writing that book and putting in a lot of my old colleagues from Key West in a fictional way, without getting them in trouble for all the crazy stuff they did.
Well, that sounds so much fun. I am so excited to see those books as well. So Godspeed and happy writing, and thank you for joining us.
Well, it's my pleasure and privilege to do so.
Great. All right, listeners, please check out The Bootlegger's Bride. You won't regret it. It's an absolutely very rewarding read. And yeah, I'm going to recommend it to everybody here at this library. So thanks for joining us. It is now time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.